I don't know about you, but anytime I find myself in a life-threatening situation, the first question that I ask myself is whether the person who might be able to save my life was properly hired using the appropriate diversity, equity, and inclusivity criteria. Competence, of course, is secondary to making sure that we're being nice to each other. And someone who I'm sure wholeheartedly agrees with that particular perspective is our North America correspondent, Julie Hartman. Julie, how are you?
I'm good. You make me laugh, Topher. It's
It's
so true.
well, but this is a story that
Imagine you're,
you kind of have to laugh at because we are literally. I'll play the video for those that don't know what I'm referencing. We're talking about the doubling down of the American Airlines leadership on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusivity requirements for their pilots. Have a listen.
Military. How is diversity and diversity targets working into the Aviate Academy?
We have committed that 50% of the classes will be women or people of color. Today, only 19% of our pilots at United Airlines are women or people of color. And by the way, from all the data I've seen, that's the highest of any airline in the country.
White males don't just dominate in the cockpits, also in the C-suite at United Airlines.
Well, look, at United, I'm proud of the diversity that we actually have in our C-suite. I think if you look around corporate America.
Correct me if I'm saying, though, this was just based off your website, the people you list as executives, but out of 11 people, 3 are women. I believe 1 is a person of color.
That's correct. But, in corporate America, I think,
That's a low bar. How do you raise your own bar?
Well, a lot of this is, focusing on it. We have programs.
Notice that slight element of almost apologising for the fact that there was only one person of colour, as though that's the criteria based on which you should be picking your C-suite. These are the people that lead your company and are ultimately responsible for your safety record. Julie, is this the right direction that the great country of America should be going in?
no, this is absolutely not the right direction. And let me start off by prefacing my statement that's saying, of course, diverse people can be, and of course are qualified to perform any job. I mean, we see that
Of
here in the
course.
United States. We have an incredibly diverse country. We've had a Black president. We have 2 Black members of the Supreme Court, 5 women out of 9. We actually have the most diverse Congress that we've ever seen in our history. Over a quarter of the United States Congress is non-white. And so I just wanted to say
Yeah,
that
yeah,
out
yeah,
front
of
because
course.
what people say, when they oppose you, they go, "Oh, well, are you implying that people who are ethnic or racial or sexual minorities can't be?" It's so asinine. So I just wanted to get that out of the way, lest we be called a name topher. But no, this is not the right direction that we should be heading in as a country. What we should be doing is prioritizing excellence and meritocracy. That is what has allowed America to ascend to become one of the greatest countries on earth. That has been our ethos. Our ethos has been that we don't judge people based on their immutable characteristics, as a great civil rights leader, Martin Luther King, urged us to do, or to not do. But we judge them on the content of their character and on their merit, which people of all backgrounds can competently show. So I think that this is sadly prioritizing immutable characteristics. And isn't it funny, Topher, because one of the things we often hear in the United States is that we were a terrible country because in the past we judged people based on those immutable characteristics. But now we're doing the same thing.
Yeah, it is. It's all just a little bit of history repeating, as Aretha Franklin would have said. What I find particularly interesting about this is that there is a flip side to everything. If you promote someone who hasn't quite earned their way there on the basis of other characteristics, nothing to do with their competence, then that means that someone else who would otherwise have got that position, someone else who was competent, is now missing out on that position. Which means, by definition, the overall quality of people that you have in those positions is going to decline the minute you introduce any criteria other than merit. And exactly like you, I've got no issue with my pilot as a woman or a person of color or any of these other things. I just want them to have been the person who was best for the job. That's my only criteria when my life is on the line. So what we're actually doing here is quite literally risking safety in return for virtue signaling.
Oh, absolutely. And I think what's so fascinating about this story is that it's indicative of a kind of broader situation here in the United States. We're all across the board, whether it's in hiring or gaining admissions to universities or the actual content that is taught in schools, we are focusing on intersectionality. We're focusing on race and gender as opposed to merit, or in the case of schooling, teaching people actual skills and actual subjects. I just want to tell you quickly that the US puts out this what's called a nations report card every few years that tracks test scores here in the United States. In last year, in 2023, only 13% of eighth graders met proficiency standards for United States history. Less than 20% scored proficiency levels in civics, and also, average math scores for eighth graders dropped 8 points from 2019, 8 points. And so what happened in that period? Well, of course, the pandemic, people were sent home from schools, but even the bigger thing is that all of these woke diktats has been suffused into these school curriculums. I had a ninth grade listener on my show, Timeless with Julie Hartman, send me one of his curriculums in his class, in his ethnic studies class, and he's not learning anything. All he's learning about is race and gender and trigger warnings. So again, I think this United story is part of a greater obsession we have in this country with immutable characteristics, when we need to be focusing on doing our jobs, hiring good people, and teaching people what they ought to learn.
It's actually takes me back to a headline that we had here in Australia, and I'm not making this up, but someone passed away with COVID, and the headline quite literally said, this person has passed away with COVID, but luckily they were vaccinated, or it would have been worse. And just the absurdity, right? And I just can't wait for the headline of, commercial airliner flies into the side of mountain, but luckily the pilot was a minority, or else it could have been worse.
I know. Well, you know what? Sadly, it's going to have to take situations like this in order to have people wake up. And I wish that it didn't have to be so dire, but to your point, it is.
Well, it's extraordinary times, and there is a sense for me that people have it's almost become a religion. People abandon any kind of sense or their own rationality in order to virtue signal and to appear to be good in this religion. But I'm quite heartened by the fact that increasingly we're seeing a bit of a cultural pushback. There are comedians now that are calling it out all over the place. There are some companies that are beginning the pendulums are beginning to come back the other way. We saw it, what was it, Victoria's Secret, of course, went very woke for a while there, and their sales plummeted, and now they're trying to backtrack. They're trying to come back a little bit. But also satirists, and satirists are wonderful people that give us a great gift every time they write a headline like this. I absolutely love this. Screwdrivers are now permitted on Boeing flights to allow passengers to help with maintenance. And this is, of course, reflecting on some of the poor safety records that have been happening recently around the world. Speaking not so much of the aeroplanes, but of the cultural side of things, to what degree do you think the fact that people like you have been speaking out on your show in Australia, the Aussie Wire have been speaking out, people like The Shovel satirising, to what degree is this having an impact, do you think, in helping to move this pendulum back in the right direction?
Oh, I think it's having a huge impact. I think sometimes we conservatives, or we rational people here in the United States, get too serious when we're, arguing about these issues. And of course they are serious, but at their core, they are absolutely absurd and ridiculous. And so I think that it's helpful to kind of laugh and just call out the absurdity for what it is. But again, I think the really important point here is that there is this greater theme of obsessing with immutable characteristics. And to laugh for a moment, I mean, when people are talking about prioritizing gay people, for instance, in hiring or in, gaining admission, I always kind of take a step back and I go, why are people so obsessed with who others sleep with? Like, isn't that kind of absurd? Like, why are we judging people? Why is that diversity, what people's private decisions are and who, they choose to love and marry and spend time with? So yes, the whole thing is totally absurd, and you got to laugh so you don't cry.
Well, I've said for a long time, and it's gotten me into trouble a few times, but I'll say it again. If your sexuality is the most interesting thing about you, you are not an interesting person.
Yeah.
I don't care what it is. You are not an interesting person. Julie Hartman, let's hope that we're not coming on with a story about a plane flying into the side of a mountain anytime soon, and that we do see a bit of common sense on this. Any final thoughts before we sign off?
Nope, just hoping that it doesn't happen. But
Yeah.
I'll keep looking at the news and we'll be talking about it here.
Julie Hartman, North America correspondent, thank you so much for joining us on the Aussie Wire.